Okay, everybody, let's cover chapter one here. Um, Chapter one of sports promotion kind of gives us an introduction to what are what we're going to be talking about throughout the semester. It's kind of an overview chapter, and so I'll go through it relatively quickly. And some of this might be review. However, some of you have never had a sports marketing class, and so what I wanted to do is kind of review uh, kind of some basic understandings of sports marketing, and then also talk a little bit about sports promotion. And so that's what we'll kind of do today. Some of the stuff for those who've had my sports marketing class may have already heard all this, and hopefully this is a refresher for you. But as we go throughout this chapter, there is a homework assignment that's due tomorrow on Tuesday, and so hopefully you have that that was handed out in class. And so as we go through this, I'll probably point out the moments where you can start working on that. Obviously, you can pause the video and do whatever you want with it, but essentially that's what we're going to do here. So let's start with talking about chapter one, which is introduction to sports promotion. And in doing that, I want to ask a couple introductory questions, and this is actually your first activity in for your homework assignment, and so make sure that you have gone through and done this. Obviously, I'm going to give you definitions for these. However, before you get into these definitions, I want you to answer these questions of how do you define marketing, how do you define sports marketing, and so what I really wanted to do to get at here was I wanted it in your own words. How would you right this second, without looking up a definition, be able to tell the everyday person on the street what these two things are and how they differ? Obviously, we're going to go over them here in a second, but go ahead and do that now if you haven't. Pause the video and do that. But hopefully you have. And so, really, what we're looking at is when we define marketing, oftentimes people use the words advertising and promotion and public relations or sales. That's all oftentimes the words that are tied to marketing. However, it is a little more in depth than that. These are all parts of the marketing process, but is not marketing itself. And in sports marketing, oftentimes people just say, well, it's marketing of sport. And we'll get more into those definitions here in a second. And so let's look at the first, the definition of marketing. How do we understand this? Well, marketing is the activities and sets of institutions and processes for creating, communicating, delivering, and exchanging offerings. And so the key, I think, to this definition, thing for you to understand is what I've underlined, that each one of these elements focus on the 4 P's in the marketing mix, which we'll cover here in a little while. But it's creating, communicating, delivering, and exchanging. And the other key word to all of this is that what we're creating, communicating, delivering, and exchanging has a value for our customers, our clients, our partners, our society at large. And so really what we're looking at is how do we do this in the sport industry? Well, if we look at sports marketing, we can kind of define it in two different ways. And if we were in class, I'd say if you guys remember, for those that have taken the classes, there's two broad ways we look at sports marketing. And the first one is marketing of sport, and the second one is marketing through sport. And you kind of see two examples here in Formula One, which is the world's NASCAR essentially. It's very popular across the globe. However, you can see on the left here is an advertisement in a magazine that talks about wanting to watch, instead of watching soccer, as you can see the guy's trying to line a soccer field, you'd rather be watching Formula One. And so he started drawing a track, and so the Formula One tracks are typically not in that round. They're in the strange shapes, as you can see there. And so marketing of sport, as we'll talk about here in a second, looks primarily at the viewpoint of the sport property. However, marketing through sport would be a non-sport entity or property trying to associate themselves with a sport property. So marketing through sport is a non-sport property trying to associate themselves with a sport property. In this circumstance, we're talking about Marlboro. So Marlboro is the sponsor of this race car, and you can see it all over. However, Marlboro is not going to help you become more successful in driving or anything else for that matter. So marketing of sport, which is that first component, again, is concerned with promoting the sport product or the sport property. And in this circumstance, the sport property is defined as anything that is producing the sport. And so the team, the league, any type of sport retailer or manufacturer or any type of event, these are all examples of sport property. So anytime that a sport property or entity, a team, a league, or anything like that is spending money to promote themselves, we call this marketing of sport. And so here's an example. I'm hoping this video will upload for us. This is one example of the NBA.
There's so many emotions at the end of the season, and nobody likes to talk about it, but one of them is fear. Fear that you come this far, and it could all end. The dream could die. But me, I like the fear. It means I'm close. It means I'm ready.
All right, so that whole series of Where Amazing Happens, and basically the NBA spending money to try to get you to watch their events, so at least get hype about their playoffs. This was a couple years ago. Is an example of marketing of sport. It's the NBA, which is the sport property, the league, trying to get you to consume their product. All right. The second broad way we look at sports marketing is through sport, and this is an example of when a company promotes a business by associating itself with a sport property. And so here's a couple examples on the bottom. The first one is UNICEF and any type of kit sponsorship or jersey sponsorship. In this circumstance, we're looking at FC Barcelona and UNICEF. The amount of money that's spent on that. We see this starting to become popular in the United States, where we see the WNBA is actually one of the few that use this now, having kit sponsorships. However, you can start to see in the NFL, lots of different jerseys are starting to have these kit sponsorships, but it's a non-sport property. In this circumstance, on the left, UNICEF, on the right, MasterCard and Huntington Bank, trying to associate themselves with a sport property and really trying to get in the same target market as the consumers of the sport. And so examples, this would be sponsorships or promotions at the event or anything that has the viewpoint of the firm. So here's another example of marketing through sport. This is a commercial from
Man, I can't believe
I think Foot Locker. Yeah, Foot Locker, and trying to associate itself with sport.
It's at Foot Locker. A whole week of the most premium kicks? Feels like all is right with the world.
I'm sorry, Evander. It's your ear.
So, Mr. Rodman, round trip to North Korea?
One way.
One way? Woo!
Goodbye, old friends.
I okay?
That's great. But a man's got to know when to walk away.
My ear. I kept that in formaldehyde.
One way. He said one way.
He's never coming back! Thanks.
I don't know. Things just feel different.
All right, so obviously that was an example of a non-sport property being Foot Locker itself, trying to associate itself with different types of sport ideas. Obviously that was funny, but any types of promotions like that. All right, so how do we actually define it? Well, it's all the activities that are designed to meet the needs and wants of consumers in the exchange process, and again has those two major thrusts or 2 points of marketing of sport and marketing through sport. And as I go through this, obviously you can pause the video to write down any definitions you want, so I'll kind of go through those relatively quickly. But normally in class I'll pause, let you write stuff down if you need to. Another thing to look at is why is sports marketing unique, and so I want to paint this picture for you. It's an interesting quote that kind of tells you a little bit about how we look at sports marketing from the viewpoint of an identity. And so let's read this one. It says, the man who uses Callaway golf clubs and drives a Jaguar and wears Ralph Lauren apparel makes a statement about his identity. And this man is separate and apart from the man who uses a pin fishing reel, drives a Dodge Durango, and wears Levi's. And so you look at these two hypothetical individuals, and they have two different types of lifestyle, two different types of spending. And so we understand that this spending and this behavior is based on the identity that they're trying to create for themselves. What I wear, what I do, and what I say is an indication of my identity, what I believe in, and what I want people to think about me, whether it's consciously or subconsciously. This is what we call social identity theory, which I'll get to in just a little while. In addition, we see that in especially North American sport, it's a commercialized environment. So this is a funny post from the London Times says American football is an occasion at which dancing girls, bands, tactical huddles, and television commercial breaks are often interrupted by short bursts of play. I don't know the statistic, but it's something like uh, in a 3 hour broadcast of an NFL game, only about 18 minutes of it is actual action. The rest of it's these different things, and so it's a very interesting. If you look at North American sport and you look at sport in general, take a step back from an objective point of view, you can see that it is somewhat strange. However, in the United States, the behavior of sports fans are oftentimes irrational, and it makes sense, and so rationally irrational. Um, so there are 5 different things. If you're writing down, taking notes, I'd write down numbers 1 through 5 and write these down. These is kind of a good broad understanding of kind of why do we need to focus on sports marketing as being unique, and why do we need to focus on how we promote the sporting events. Well, the first one is the sport product is invariably intangible and subjective. In other words, I can't take the event home with me. I can't touch the event. If I go to a baseball game, for example, once that event has occurred, it's over, and that's another part of it. But the point is, the only thing I can take home with me is memories, except for the fact that maybe I could take a t-shirt or hat home with me. But for the most part, a fan leaves with just their experience. And so that's really important in that while we cannot always control the outcome of the game, we'll get to in a second, it's important to understand that these intangible aspect to it. Another part of it, since we can't take anything on with us, and it's all about expectations and experiences, we have to understand that sports are typically subjective. They are pervasive throughout all society. Sport is relevant to a lot of people. However, how the people consume sport is different, and people have different opinions. And so, when we say subjective, that means it's something that's based on their own individual's perceptions. I'm sorry. And so while I go to a game, and I don't mind having in these pictures you can see a mascot dancing on the dugout, somebody sitting next to me who may be more about the nostalgia of baseball and focusing on the strategy in it may not like those mascots. And so we as sports marketers have to make decisions, especially in the event form, of how do we reach our target market. We have to understand we can't be all things to all people. In other words, I can't make marketing decisions that will please every single person that comes through my turnstile. However, what I can do is ensure that I'm meeting the overall needs of my target market and understand that I can't please everybody. However, I should try to do my best to meet their expectations and exceed them. So the first one, again, is it's intangible and subjective. I know that's 2 different things, but that's the first reason why sports marketing is unique. So if you're writing down 1, 2, 3, that was number 1. Here's number 2. Number 2 is that sport product and the event format is inconsistent and unpredictable. In other words, I cannot guarantee a win at the end of the day. I can't even guarantee that my best players are going to perform well. And so me as a marketer have to understand that this is a part of why sport is unique and why people liked watching it. If we knew that my home team, my favorite team, was going to win every single game for the next 10 years, I would be probably happy. However, if I knew that without a shadow of a doubt, I probably wouldn't watch the games, because if I know the outcome of the game, what's the point of it? Part of the appeal of sporting events is that there is no guaranteed win, and that it is going to be a nail biter, sit on the edge of your seat type of event. However, not every year we're going to be able to guarantee that. We might have the best players on the court, and all of them get hurt. And so we can't necessarily say that we're going to do really well. And so in our marketing messages, we have to make sure that we are playing upon this inconsistency and unpredictability, and that any given Sunday a team could win. However, if we know this, so this is the second one, inconsistent and predictable, we know there's no guarantee win. Our third thing is we have to make sure that we place a greater emphasis on the product extensions rather than the core product. In other words, if your core product is not very good, it sucks in the circumstance of Justin Bieber here, you have to focus on the product extensions, basically guaranteeing the sizzle rather than the product itself. And so while I may have offended some Justin Bieber fans out there, I'm not a big fan of his music, and he was having issues with his image, and so he changed who he was and what he looked like. And so again, when it's inconsistent, unpredictable in the core product, in this circumstance, Justin Bieber isn't so hot, isn't doing so well, then you have to focus on your product extension, so his personality, his lifestyle. Translate that into the sporting event. If my team is not doing so hot, I have the worst record in the league, or my star players are hurt, and I can't really do any control of that. I can't control how the coach makes their calls. Me as a sport marketer, I still have to sell the ticket. And so while my core product, the game itself, might not have be very substantial, I have to make sure that I guarantee the sizzle. In this circumstance, these product extensions. I have to make sure the concession stands are cleanly and the food's good, and I have to make sure that parking is efficient, and I make sure that the kids area or the entertainment area is meeting the needs of my customers. That's the things that are in this event format. I have to make sure that I'm meeting their needs. So that was the third one. The fourth one is that the sport product, again, in the event format, is perishable commodity. It has to be pre-sold. In other words, the picture here is of me and my wife. We went in 2011 to Germany with a study abroad program. And for those of you interested in study abroad and interested in sport, I'm taking a group in 2016. I'm sure I'll tell you more about to Europe, and it'll be during the Euro Cup, the UEFA Euro Cup, in the summer of 2016. You get 6 hours of credit. But anyway, but what you can see here is a ticket that we went to a FIFA Women's World Cup game again between France and the U.S. That ticket I still have, but it's not worth what it was the day before it happened. In other words, once the event occurs, that ticket is not worth really anything. You can't sell a ticket to yesterday's game in the purpose of fulfilling its purpose. In other words, I can't sell it. I can sell it for memorabilia reasons, but it's not going to be worth what it was the day before. The reason is because the sport product and its event format is simultaneously produced and consumed. And so as we look at this from a marketing standpoint, again, it's intangible and subjective. I have to make sure that my customers' expectations are being met and exceeded. And so if I can't meet expectations, really, I'm not going to be successful. And so that's the fourth one, is that it's a perishable commodity. And the fifth one, the last one of the five, is that it's a publicly consumed product. In other words, our satisfaction of our customers is often tied to their ability to socialize with their friends, or social facilitation. Less than 2% of people actually attend sporting events by themselves. And so what we have to make sure we do is we create an opportunity for our customers to feel like they can communicate with other people that are like themselves. This is what we call social identity theory. In other words, as marketers, our job is to make sure that our customers are able to show others what they believe in. And so I'll give you the example of me as a SFA fan. I moved here about a year ago. I wanted to be seen as part of the SFA community. So how can I go about doing that? Well, I would go buy an SFA t-shirt or a hat. And I did that, bought both, and wore that around even in my first or second week on campus. Well, based on social identity theory, that suggests that I'm trying to associate myself with the SFA brand because I want people to think of me as an SFA fan. I want to fit in. And so people make decisions, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, to partake in certain behaviors that want to identify with a certain social group. And some people do it on purpose. I wear a certain type of clothes because I want to be seen that way. Or I want to wear the Houston Astros shirt because the Astros are successful at this moment in time. And so I want to be a part of that success. And so that's, again, that social identity theory. And so know that we have to create products and activities that enhance this group attendance and the socialization. So in the sport industry, we know that it's a very valuable industry, and that's why we study it separately from others. Globally, the sport industry is worth estimated $620 billion. Let's just look at North America, though. North America in 2017, it's projected to be $67.7 billion industry. So there's a ton of money, and that's just on the sport property side. There's a ton of money on the other side. And so you see from a sport property, a big portion of that will be gate revenues and sponsorships and media rights. These are all areas where we can make a ton of money. In this class, we're going to spend a ton of time on two of those three. Gate revenues, in other words, how do we sell tickets, season tickets, group tickets, hospitality areas, and sponsorships is the other part. And how do we go about selling that and developing sponsorship programs? Okay, I'm going to skip through this real quick. And so what is promotion? So we're in sports promotion. There's 4 P's in the marketing mix. Hopefully you know them. Actually, let me back up one. Okay, I don't have them listed. But anyway, the 4 P's of the marketing mix you should hopefully know, and those are product, price, place, and promotion. And I like to say in my sports marketing class that I cover the first three: product, price, and place. And then a promotion is this class. The reason I want to separate this is because in sports promotion, there are a lot of moving parts. There are a lot of careers and a lot of uniqueness to the sport industry when it comes to promotion. And so again, promotion is just one element of the four P's of the marketing mix, and it's defined in your book on page 3 as a fully integrated set of communication activities. So the key to this definition is that it's about communications in which we're trying to, 1, persuade customers toward a favorable belief, or 2, cause action as a tactical component of the overall campaign. And so kind of to summarize this definition, we're trying to communicate with our customers to persuade them or call them to action. And so you'll hear call to action a lot throughout the semester. And again, it's ways where we can get people to actually do what we want them to do. And so it's the messages that we're sending. If we look at the promotion mix, traditionally, if you've taken advertising and promotion, there's 4 basic types: advertising, publicity, sales promotion, and personal selling. And so we have to focus on the sport promotion mix because sport is unique. As we've told you, how people interact with the sport industry, there are unique characteristics. And so let's look at what we call the contemporary sport promotion mix. There are 8 different elements of this promotion mix. If I were you, I would go through and memorize these, and not just memorize them for purposes of memorizing, but to actually learn them. And we're going to go through each one of these very briefly here in a second. But the first one is advertising, publicity, personal contact, incentives, and atmospherics. These 5 were added to, not personal contact, personal selling, personal contact are same here. But anyway, these are part of the nonprofit promotion mix that we use in the contemporary sport promotion. We're also going to add licensing, sponsorship, and community relations. And so let's go through each one of these. In class, we'll do a Kahoot next time, so hopefully you watch this. But let's go through each one of these. That will kind of wrap up this lectures to kind of understand each one of these areas. And I won't go in too depth. There are several chapters that we devote specifically to these elements. Others, this might be the only time we cover them, but we will spend time on them now. So the first one is one of those that there's no chapter in this class that we specifically cover it. And so this is pretty much the only time we're going to talk about advertising from a theoretical definition point of view. However, we will use advertising, will be discussed throughout the semester. Advertising promotion is a class that we offer here at SFA. And so if you're interested in getting into advertising after either this lecture or as we talk throughout the semester, I highly suggest you take that class. And so first one, this is actually part of your homework assignment. So I wanted you to kind of discuss this. And so if you're to that point, I think the second activity is to answer this question: what is advertising in your own words? Why is it most commonly thought of as the definition of marketing? In other words, a lot of times people, when you're walking down the street, because this happens all the time, right? But when you're talking to somebody and they say advertising, they think of marketing. When they say marketing, they think of advertising. However, it's just one element of the promotion mix, which is just one element of the 4 P's of the marketing mix. And so this is just one section of the marketing mix. One subsection of the marketing mix. And so why do you think that is? So if you're in the homework assignment, go ahead and pause the video and go ahead and answer that question, and then we'll get into it. So why is it most commonly thought of? Well, oftentimes it is the most visible, at least in what we're talking about here. Advertising is defined in your book on page 4 as any paid form of non-personal presentation of ideas, goods, or services to an identified sponsor. And so in other words, advertising, and another way to reword it or to underline is the keywords here is any paid form of non-personal communication. So examples of advertising we'll get to here in a second, but any paid form of non-personal communication. So how about advertising? Well, how much is spent? Well, it's estimated that $27.4 billion are spent on advertising in sport, and of these advertisers, 5.68 billion of them are spent by the top 50. And you can see in the sport, what are the top 50 sport advertisers? I just wanted to give you an idea. You don't need to know any of this, but Verizon was one of the highest ranked in 2011. Anheuser-Busch number 2, AT&T, Ford, Chevrolet, Toyota. You can kind of see a series of industries. Well, kind of the point and the reason why we have this is a lot of times these industries match directly with the same target market that are in sporting events. Again, they're trying to reach consumers that are in similar target market. And so you can look through this if you want, but again, you don't need to know it. But there's a ton of money spent on advertising by some of these big companies. And so what is an example of advertising? Again, going back to the definition of advertising, it's any paid non-personal communication. And so these are all examples of paid non-personal communication. So the first one's naming rights. So the AT&T Center in Dallas for the Dallas Cowboys, what is commonly known as Jerry's World, that's an example of naming rights. So any facility that has a corporate sponsor, again, we're talking about marketing through sport, as the official sponsor of the facility. Any type of facility signage within that facility. So while it's AT&T Center, they may have the Coca-Cola club section, or it may be signs that direct you to the concession stand, and it's Coca-Cola is that signage. That's an example of advertising. Again, you're not writing a specific person's name on it, and the company's paying to put that sign up. That's an example of advertising. Again, paid non-personal communication. Digital signage, we see this a lot in facility, especially newer facilities that have ribbon boards. We also see digital signage on e-platforms, so on the internet. Broadband and broadcast and broadband commercials. Broadcast is defined as television communication and radio communication. Broadband access is considered internet. And so anytime you see streaming live on the internet, there will be commercials. That's another form of paid non-personal communication in the form of advertising. Outdoor advertising or outdoor signage that is not attached to the facility is another example. We'll talk about ambush marketing in sport when we get to sponsorship, but it's trying to associate yourself with a sporting event or property without paying for the rights to do so. You see it all the time in the World Cup and the Olympics, and you see it in all the time across any type of high-profile sporting event or brand. Product endorsements, so this would be athlete branding, so athletes that would spend their personal time endorsing a product. This is, again, paid non-personal communication. And then manufactured media, so this would be the creative side of it, so this would be the brochures, the flyers, anything that the customer might actually see. However, we see some shifts in how we look at advertising in sport. And one of them is professional league networks. So now we see the NFL network, NBA TV, MLB extra innings. These are all examples of programming where advertising is starting to occur. The second section is broadband. Big changes, broadband networks, like I just discussed. For example, MLB.com has the at-bat application you can put on your iPhone or your Apple. All of those are examples of. Sorry about that. There's a dog. Or those are all examples of broadband advertising opportunities. International broadcasting, so the IOC, so the International Olympic Committee, the EPL, any other types of where we see sports being broadcast across the globe. We see contracts with distributors and leagues and networks. Television networks, again, in niche sports, so Fox Sports 1 or NBC Sports Network, these are all examples of where we see kind of these less well-known sports, but still has a following where there is value to it and the advertising dollars are spent. So again, advertising is paid non-personal communication. The second one is publicity. Publicity is kind of very similar but opposite. In other words, it is non-personal, and so that's the same as advertising. However, this is not paid. So the key to this definition that is not paid non-personal communication. So it differs from advertising in that if a company spends money on a billboard, that is not publicity. They spend money, and therefore it is advertising. However, if a newspaper or news station covers a sporting event or anything like that, that's an example of publicity because you're not paying them to do it. And so what we see is a lot of sport athletic departments, leagues, and teams hire individuals that their sole job is to work directly with media. Because if we can get some publicity, we're not spending the money on it, and we're getting a return on our advertising dollar because we're able to get even more publicity than advertising. And so, for example, at SFA, we have what we call media relations specialist. And in this, let's see if it'll open up. You can see that if you look at our staff page on the sfajax.com, there is media relations. There's 3 individuals. Rand Champion, Zach Reynolds, and Brian Newton. And their job is specifically with certain sports, their job is to spend time specifically creating and distributing information to the media. This is known as press agentry. And again, they're the marketers for those individual sports with the different media outlets. People want to learn about the sport, and so they create a lot of things such as pregame notes. So here's an example of pregame notes, just created by, I guess, this is Georgia State. But essentially, it gives you ideas of basic information about the team that the media would want to cover. So any interesting stories, things like that. They would create things such as hard news and soft news. So hard news stories would be facts, the who, what, where, when, why, and how, those types of stories. But then also create soft news stories. So these would be dramatized stories, opinion pieces, things that would tell the background to certain athletes that media would want to run or at least hear about so that they can talk to their customers about it or clients about it. But promotion specialists create a lot of different items. But again, their job is to get the media to cover the sport. It's non-paid, non-personal communication. Okay. Personal contact is another one, and this is an example of personal selling. It's sometimes called that, and it's basically any person-to-person communication. It does not have to be face-to-face. It can be over the phone, but the key here is it's person-to-person communication. It's individualized, and really what we're looking at here is to target the individual's interest and needs, and also adds a human element to the transaction. In other words, this is why we need personal communication, so that we can target individual customers. And this leads to what we call relationship marketing. Relationship marketing is defined in your book on page 6, but it's your way of identifying, maintaining, and building a network with individual customers. That's the first key to this. And the second one is so that you have a mutually beneficial relationship, or both sides are mutually benefited from the relationship. And so this, traditionally, when you build these individual relationships, it leads to loyalty. And loyalty, we'll talk about later in the semester in depth. Loyalty leads to satisfaction. Well, satisfaction leads to loyalty, and loyalty leads to repurchase intentions. And so when we look at this relationship building, there's different types of bonding. At the most lowest level or most basic level is rewarding spending. If you look at athletic departments and college and programs across the country, financial bonding is the lowest type. And this is where we see like a rewards program for attending events. It's kind of a punch card. For every time you come in, you get a X number of points, and you can use that for concession stands or something like that. Again, focusing just on spending. Second type of bonding, where you're having this individual connection, is social bonding, and basically building a reciprocal relationship between the service provider and the customer. Again, this is the personalization of the service. And the last one is the structural bonding, and this is very personalized. It's individualistic, and where the salesperson or the marketer develops that beneficial relationship between them, and they both mutually benefit from it. There are 3 subcomponents to personal contact, and we'll talk a lot about one of them this semester. It's selling, servicing, and monitoring. And so let's go through these very briefly. Selling, you can have different types of selling. There's direct and indirect. Direct selling will be those scheduled sales meetings, suggested sales procedures such as telemarketing and things like that. A lot of the jobs in the sport industry start in the telemarketing or inside sales representatives. We'll get to that in the second module. And then there's indirect, and so this is media appearances by players and front office staff, civic presentations such as Rotary clubs, or any time the player goes out and does a reading program. Well, those kids will then want to come. So you're trying to promote your brand, but also try to get people to buy your product. So that's indirect. And really the importance of organizational involvement is contacts. We need to meet people who are potential clients, be their friend first, develop a relationship with them, and then find out how you can benefit with them. That's hard to do when you do telemarketing and entry-level sales positions, but when somebody feels cared for, then they're going to be more likely to spend money. Okay, and do that seriously and genuinely. The second component is servicing, and we'll talk about this in later in the semester. But the key is basically to have a staff in place that loves the organization. The key is customer satisfaction. Have people in a place that love the organization. And these are volunteers typically, one that stand behind the brand. And we know that good customer service leads to an increase in sales. And so if we have an opportunity where we can make a person happy, then we go about doing that. Last semester we went to an Astros game that was bad weather. I knew a couple people, but the point is that they had very good customer service, and is going to let several of my friends come for free to a future game because of issues that were out of their control, but they stepped in and showed that they cared for their customers. The problem here is that a lot of our customer service staff are frontline workers, and these frontline workers in sport are typically seasonal. They're part-time, and a lot of them don't receive benefits. And so there's not a whole lot that we do monetarily that can benefit them. Some of them are just volunteers. And so what we have to do is, as managers and marketers, because we're not typically the ones on the front line, we have to make sure that we're training these staff, training to be courteous. So example, a customer may come in and the only encounter they may have with any staff are these seasonal workers. And so if they're not trained to be courteous and know how to deal with clients, then they're not going to be successful, and the client and the customers are likely not going to come back in the future. They have to be proactive, meeting expectations and exceeding those. An example is in baseball. A lot of baseball clubs, when a foul ball goes into the stands, while it may be obvious it didn't hit anybody, that got caught in his glove, they still go and make sure everybody's okay. That's a very common thing. So being proactive to make sure there's no issues later on. Establishing a rapport, and so putting our for example, our ushers in certain sections of the ballpark so that they know their season ticket holders and they can go to them and know them by a personal basis. And it's not the same. It's the same person every single time, and they're receiving the same exceptional service. And then plan extra transactional encounters, again, where our upper administration should engage with everyday customers and employees. We have to understand that we are not, as middle and upper management, we are not the average Joes, and we don't see the same treatment the average Joes do. And so ensure that we do that. So servicing is important. And the third subcomponent of personal contact is monitoring. And one way we do this is through word of mouth and electronic word of mouth. We know that voice is very important. We know that if we do not pay attention to the customer's voice, they're not going to be heard. And if they feel like they're not heard, then they're not going to have satisfaction with their purchase experience, and that in turn leads to low repurchase intentions. And so really word of mouth and electronic word of mouth are a very powerful tool. Both negative word of mouth, we can deter that by listening to what they have to say. But we also know that if we're not paying attention to them, we're going to have to be finding new customers. And so what costs more? A new customer or an existing customer? In other words, does it cost more to retain our clients or find new ones? The answer is it's more costly to a marketer to find new clients than it is existing. We don't have to go through the whole process again. And so word of mouth is a free way to increase sales. At the end of the day, we have to understand what our customers are and what they're thinking. For example, what the Mavericks have done is created this website called friends.mavs.com. And in this website, it's a way where the Mavs fans can go in and talk about the club, what they like, what they don't like. And this is hosted by the Dallas Mavericks. It's a way they can go in and listen to what people are saying. Another way that we can focus on this is finding our cultural and opinion leaders. That's fundamental to any effective word-of-mouth campaign. It's important to use these opinion leaders, and basically they could be internal, external to the sport organization, but it's people who have authority in the community and say things that are beneficial to our brand. Okay. So that was personal contact. The fourth one is incentives. Incentives, we'll have a whole chapter about this, so I'm going to fly through this part. But essentially, it's a way to increase demand through different types of activities. Demand-based promotions are price discounts, and incentives are typically those that encourage consumption that include discounts but are not just discounts. So it represents emotional, psychological, social, functional, or financial conditions that encourage some overt behavioral response. The key to this definition, or key to understanding incentives, is that we're trying to stimulate swift buyer action. In other words, we're trying to get our customers to do something. We'll talk about consumption when we get to that chapter, but really the key is to understand your client. Know who they are, know why they purchase, why they don't purchase, and we'll again cover this in chapter 3 in depth. The fifth one is atmospherics. Atmospherics, we're looking at the facility or the place in which the customer interacts with the brand. And so again, these are all defined on page 10 as all efforts to design the place of purchase. So here is the 4 P's of the marketing mix. One of them is place. But this is where we talk about promotion and place mixing. Anyway, to purchase or consumption so that as to create specific cognitive or emotional effects to customers. Again, relating to place marketing, we have such things as points of purchase. These are displays, posters, signs, or any type of in-store material that point toward a purchase site. In other words, it's causing people to want to buy it. It's the physical direction givers, it's the flyers, it's the posters, that's the boards that are up in the facility. And so sports products are unique in that they're simultaneously produced and consumed, and so our job is to make sure that our amenities are meeting the customer's desire. If we are Fenway Park, our job is to make sure that nostalgia is a part of our culture. If you look at the Miami Heat versus the San Antonio Spurs, those are two different brands, and they're both successful brands in the sense of from a marketing standpoint. But they represent two different things. The San Antonio Spurs are very much tradition oriented because that's what their target market wants to see. However, Miami Heat might be more innovative, young, hip type of focus. So understanding atmospherics not only in our brand but in our facilities is important. We'll talk more about that when we get to the servicescape. The sixth one is licensing. We have a whole chapter that talks about this. But if we look at the major revenue sources for sport entities, and apparently that's not linked, so let me, I'll just tell you about it. If you look at, for example, the International Olympic Committee, you can Google this if you want, and I'll bring it up some other time. But if you look at the Olympic Games, their major revenue sources, there's 4 of them. Sponsorship is a large one, and broadcasting rights is a large one. But they also make a lot of money off of licensing and ticket sales. And so for pretty much any sport organization, there are 4 main revenue sources. Sponsorship, broadcasting rights fees, licensing, and ticketing. And so what is licensing? Well, it's any entity outside of the organization that uses that organization's symbols for profit. And so I'll give you 2 examples of licensing here on the screen. Team USA, this is a t-shirt that was produced by, who knows, some manufacturer, but they had to pay the U.S. Olympic Committee or U.S. Olympic Team rights to produce that shirt. We'll talk about licensing rights fees, but it can pretty much be a hat, a t-shirt, a shoe, a jacket. It could be anything and everything that has the official logo on it. On the right, you see another picture of the Olympic rings. Anytime the Olympic rings are used, the Olympic Committee is getting a portion of that sale, and it all depends on the negotiated rights for them. So really, there's benefits of licensing programs. The first one is promotion. In other words, it's free publicity. People are walking billboards. You're walking around with the SFA logo on your shirt, and not only do they get money from that, so that's the second part, profitability. A licensee has to pay a one-time fee, and they also pay ongoing fees for every shirt that's sold. Not only are you getting money as the sport property for the customer to buy that shirt, but you're also getting free publicity. It's something you didn't have to deal with. Again, it's walking billboards. And then the last one is protection, legal protection. So if somebody wants to use, at least in the United States, use the SFA logo, we have legal protection to try to get rid of that. It's harder to do this globally, but it's still something to look at. All right, sponsorship is another area, and sponsorship is a large part of the promotion mix. Again, it's one of the large revenue sources of a sport organization, and so we've kind of already covered that. I won't go in too much in depth into this, but we look at corporate partners as being an appropriate vehicle for brand image and customer loyalty with a sports fan, because values oftentimes match the corporate images, and customers in sports are often loyal to sponsors. So for example, in NASCAR, studies show that a NASCAR fan of one driver will buy that driver's sponsored goods above all others, and they will go out of their way to not buy that sponsor's competitor's product. So let's say I'm a fan of the driver who is a Lowe's car. Well, if I was a fan of that, I probably would go to the Lowe's here in town. And in addition to that, if my driver's rival driver was Home Depot, and Home Depot is right across the street from me, then I'm going to go out of my way to go find the Lowe's. And so there's lots of social identity issues there in sponsorship. We're going to have a whole module that talks about that, so I'm going to go and move on to the last one, which is community relations. And community relations is oftentimes tied to, it's a part of public relations. Corporate public relations are typically non-sales oriented public relations. So being a good citizen or taking pride in your community, that's a corporate public relations. Marketing public relations are typically those that integrate sales and marketing efforts of the corporation with an awareness of the social, political, or economic environment in which they interact. And so it's basically done to influence attitudes about the company. However, what we talk about here on the promotions from a sport property standpoint is community relations. And again, this is the process of interacting and connecting between, providing connection between the sport property and the community. Or the target population within that community. And so we see this as three different ways of being implemented. The first one is having a league-wide structure, and so the NBA Cares is an example. Hey, that's a league-wide structure. The second one is team, and this would be the Dallas Mavericks going out and doing a reading program. That would be team. And the third one is player, and so this would be Dirk Nowitzki having his own foundation. And so the three ways that community relations is implemented in sport is, again, the league, the team, and the player. And the key to any community relations is that it garners attention toward a cause while also attracting the customer toward the organization. And really, we look at community relations for two reasons. One, we want to create goodwill with our community. We want to know that we support the community. That's obviously for reasons of getting more customers, but also being good citizens, going back to that corporate public relations. And then finally, creating grassroots programs. So starting kids being active at the lowest level and working our way up to the adults. Okay. So really those again are the key elements to promotion. And so really the reasons we have this course is we want to be able to know how do we communicate with consumers and understanding their behavior. How do we critically examine sports marketing duties as it relates to promotion and sales? And so our project and two of our modules focus on sales and promotion. And I know sales is sometimes a dry word and people go, oh, I don't want to talk about sales. Well, in the sport industry, it is very rewarding and is not the typical way you think of sales, and we'll talk about that later. Not everyone can or needs to be a winner in the circumstance of every promotional tactic. And then sales and services are often lacking in sports marketing preparation and practices. So, in other words, they're hiring people who have sales training. I've talked to multiple executives across the country in sport industries, and they all say the same thing. When creating and getting a degree in sport business, marketing, management, whatever it may be, if you don't have a sales background, if you haven't talked about sales, then we don't want to hire you. And so this class is hopefully going to fulfill that need. So, that's chapter 1. Again, unfortunately, I wasn't able to be there to answer any questions. So if you had questions throughout this, please write them down. I'll review this next time, just briefly answer any questions you have. But tomorrow, make sure you've done your homework assignment, and then also make sure that you've read chapter 1 and taken the quiz, because we start chapter 2 tomorrow. We will talk to you later. Bye.